Welcome, comrades. This is online communist forum organised by Communist Party of Great Britain, and we're pleased to have today comrade from Iran, a long time ago, Dr. Shahmanesh, Mohsen Shahmanesh, a former editor of Iran Bulletin. We're talking about the global context for the Middle Eastern wars. So, Mohsen, I expect anything up to an hour, and then we'll go for discussion.
Dan, Yasmin is the second speaker. We have two speakers, so
Oh,
one.
yes.
Yes.
You've got Yassamine Matha as well. So first, Mohsen, uh, please go ahead.
Right. Well, thank you for inviting me to give this talk. I'm quite an amateur in this, so effectively, what I'm going to talk is really pose some questions more than anything else, rather than having any answers to this. And the question we're going to look at is just to kind of remind ourselves that, or at least from my point of view, we're entering a completely new era in the world. We have an era where really all the assumptions we've so far had, or some of them anyway, are under question, and I think we may need to really, it's all been torn apart. So we need to really look at the world with new eyes in some ways, not necessarily totally, but in some ways. And it's from this kind of angle that I'm approaching what I'm going to say. And as I said, it's going to be mainly more questions than answers. I'm very freely admit, I really am quite an amateur in all this. But I'm going to really look at three main crises that the world faces. There are others as well, but these are the three main ones that we're going to talk about. And they're kind of, although they're separate, but they are interlocked with one another in very complex ways. They sort of overlap with each other. Yet they have their own inner logic. They have their own inner momentum. They have their own inner change, but they are in some ways linked. And I think the best way to look at them, these three crises, is like in a Venn diagram where in some ways they're independent, in some ways they're interlinked, in some ways they affect each other. And these three are the crisis of hegemony, which you're all aware of. And obviously, here we're talking about mainly the battle for hegemony between America and China, but there are other contestants as well in this one. There's a climate crisis, which is not just the temperature crisis. It's not just a crisis in raising temperatures, but it's a crisis in water, it's a crisis in resources, it's a crisis in almost everything. In plastics, it's a crisis in species. You know, we're all aware of the nature of this crisis, but it's a crisis that's not ahead of us; it's actually here. And the third one is uh, the structural crisis in capitalism, which we've seen it began since the 90s, but manifested itself since the crash in the 2008 and has continued since then. And it's a crisis of productivity, in other words, of accumulation. But there's also a total restructuring of the capitalist system with the new gig and new information economy, so that all the relationships that we've known to date are now being torn apart and torn asunder. The relationship between labor, between capital, between the markets, the forms of exploitation, they've all changed. And it is in this kind of world that we are actually now looking at what's happened in the Middle East. So with that in mind, let's just look at the way that I think currently the US and Israel are trying to uh, address some aspects of this. The sort of coalition, the bloc that came to power in Russia, in the US with Trump this time around as well, this time particularly, is a bloc made up predominantly, as far as I can see, of the military-industrial complex, the agribusiness, particularly the meat agribusiness as symbolized by the Koch brothers, who have this huge agribusiness, but others as well. And of course, Silicon Valley and all the tech millionaires that go with that. And that makes this sort of core of the bloc that's now conducting the policies of that particular hegemonic power, the United States. And the point to make is they're all energy intensive, both military industrial complex, the agribusiness, and also the tech. The so-called the Silicon Valley are highly energy intensive. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when we look at the way things are moving, particularly around globally, but particularly what the subject of our talk today, which is the Middle East. So how are they responding to this? Well, let's state the obvious. There's the increase in the military expenditure, increase not just in the US, but across the whole of NATO, and an enormous increase in military expenditure that's happening in there, and also the huge investments that are happening in the military technological part of the military industrial complex. The fact that wars are being happening and are increasingly going to happen more and more, and I think I would confidently predict we're going to see more and more wars as time goes on. We're seeing wars in Africa. We're seeing wars in not just in the Middle East, but in Africa. We're seeing wars in the Congo. We're seeing wars in Sudan. I mean, there are wars everywhere, and at the basis of that war, of many of these wars, is the three crises we're talking about. And then we have the sort of battle for deregulation, the releasing of the dogs of Silicon Valley across the world, particularly with emphasis on Europe, but also anywhere else, where effectively America is using its current advantage in the tech industry, in the tech sector, to push for advantages for itself. And then, of course, we have the issue of the opposing of the green economy, which was exemplified by the "drill baby drill" slogan, by the fact that all the laws that related to the green economy were annulled immediately, and even in the latest beautiful bill of Trump, we saw this the taxes increased on all so-called eco-friendly technologies. And if you look at all these, they're all aimed and directed at the main rival for hegemony, which is China. And it's worth just stopping a moment and looking back to see that China, since the 1990s, has really been investing intensely on the green economy. And currently, at the moment, is the major exporter of consumer goods in so-called green economy and in fossil fuel, in avoiding fossil fuel, in fossil fuel free energy. I mean, just to give an example, in fact, since in the last year, 40% of all the growth in the GDP of China was in the green economy. And if you took that away, then the Chinese GDP growth rate would have been 3% rather than 5% that was recorded. So, and they're going. I mean, this is actually is now policy as agreed by the Chinese Communist Party. The Xi Jinping's ecological policy. I can't remember the exact name of that. That sort of underpins this thing. So the things that the three crises that I've described, the major battle in the world regarding these three crises, the major reply that is happening by the USA is directed against China. And let's see how that works. We'll see. So, for instance, we see. Sorry. Now let's just for a second look at Israel. This group will be very familiar with Moshe Machover's analysis of the very essence of the Zionist regime in Israel, regardless of the different sections of it. It's different strands in there. It is the expulsion of the Palestinian people from the land between the sea and the river, and sometimes it's in some definitions it goes beyond that as well. And that is and all the other policies about Israel, I think, are related to this fundamental necessity of the Zionist state to actually become the hegemon of the region. And this has been his primary policy over the last ever since its inception, and we see that happening whenever the excuse he gets now. And we saw that happening quite recently in the way they dealt with the issues, the current battle going on there. But before we go on to that, I think I need to emphasize that Israel has its own independent policy, but it's also deeply entwined with the military-industrial complex of the US. I think that's quite an important point, because in a way, Israel, particularly in the tech sector of the military industrial complex, has very close cooperation. Indeed, it has taken part of that production within Israel itself. We could see that in the sort of very, very close ties between companies like IBM, like Alphabet, like Microsoft, like Amazon in Israel, but also companies that specifically relate to security and espionage, like USTO, NSO, and Calibrate, and others. So we need to see, it is in that sense that the Israel is not just a close ally of the United States, it's actually integrated within the military-industrial complex of the United States. So with those two provisions in mind, of the US effectively being targeting all its policies towards China, and Israel needing to develop its hegemonic control over the region because of this fundamental necessity of becoming a big Jewish state in the entire land that they designated as the land given to them by God, which I'm sure most of you are very familiar with after discussions of Moshe Machover. So, if we're then to simplify the aims of the US in the region, I think the aims of the US in the region, if we accept that their main target is China, is in the first place to deny China access to oil, but also to try and get access to other minerals that are important to China and also to the world economy, such as, for instance, things like lithium and so on, that are critical for things like batteries. And this is where Iran comes in. And Iran has a huge resources, deposits of lithium, and all the other important drugs that are important minerals that are essential for the newer global economy. And of course, the Middle East lies in the major trade route of China for the rest of the world. So again, control of that region for the US is quite important. So the aim of US if it is to deny China control of the region and control of the mineral resources of the region, including oil, it really wants just obedient states that not necessarily need to be weak, but they need to be obedient to the United States. They need to be close allies to the United States. And this differs from Israel, which effectively, because its aim is regional hegemony, it really requires weak states that cannot challenge its hegemony. And this was either by breaking them up, like as they did with the help of the US in Israel, in Iraq some years ago, and this is or is by attacking and weakening militarily as they've done with Hezbollah and or changing regime as they've done in Syria. And therefore, their aim in Iran is effectively regime change of some kind or other, either to break up the country or have regime change. And in this sense, their aim is slightly different from the United States. So we can see that the two, Israel and US, have aims that are in the same direction, but not necessarily overlap. Not necessarily exactly the same. They are closely allied in that, but their ultimate aims are the ultimate needs are different. For one, it's to have docile, friendly client states. For the other, it is having weak states. And of course, after they dealt with Iran, if they can deal with Iran, then the issue comes up of what they're going to do with Turkey, which is a member of NATO. What are they going to do with Saudi Arabia, which they already nearly solved when they had the Abraham Accords, but which was then put on abeyance by the October events of 2024. And then and then of course Egypt comes in as well in the future. So I think we need to look at this trajectory in anything that we analyze. I really summarize very quickly, maybe very badly, what I wanted to say, but I think I'll stop here and leave just Yasmin to take over in more detail how this is these global events are being reflected in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thanks, Mohsen, and over to you straight away, Yassamine. I can't hear you. You're muted. Yeah.
Sorry, I have too many windows open. Yes, thanks very much, Mohsen. I think we are exploring if you like, the global context. Neither of us are claiming we have a full view of this, but I think what the scenes that Mohsen explained go some way in terms of describing where we are. And in some ways, there is there is a competition, and this competition isn't between socialist China and imperialist US. It's a inter-imperialist conflict, or at least an inter-capitalist conflict. There are rumors and possibilities that, despite the fact that I have on a number of occasions argued where was China when Iran was being bombed, and this was to silence those who defend Iran's great position in the BRICS and the wonderful possibilities that Russia and China propose. Apparently China managed to restrain both sides, but I don't think Trump had any intention of a full-scale war against Iran. So we have to see this as a crisis-prone US trying to stop a rival, a capitalist rival. But on the other hand, there are also regional issues. The regional problem is, if you like, the challenge that what I would call US-Israel-Saudi bloc face. Because although the Saudis have distanced themselves from supporting genocide in Israel. They really haven't done much about it. And we know that if October 7th, 2023 hadn't happened, we would have definitely seen the growth of the Abraham Accord, the joining of Saudi Arabia, paving the way for others to join. And here the reason that has been blocked is not because any of these countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, have changed their position about opening relations with Israel because of the financial benefits and the US interventions in this. It is because they are scared of their own populations. And they realize that taking that final step is not going to be accepted by their own populations. So in some ways, the Abraham Accord is at the center of all this because in many people's arguments, October the 7th was a desperate act to stop the Abraham Accord. Whether this is true or not is another matter. What we can say is that the consequence of it was to stop that. And of course, Israel has worked step by step in getting to a stage where it could attack Iran. I have fellow countrymen, Mohsen knows, who more or less repeated, and some of them supposedly on the left. Some of the left organizations, I noticed some people were quoting in this room a couple of weeks ago. What is Gaza and Lebanon to do with us? That's a slogan of, I would say, right-wing reactionaries in Tehran, and some of these organizations of the left were repeating that. Well, it has everything to do with Iran, because it was precisely the genocide that has weakened Hamas, who was never the natural ally of Iran's Islamic republics. They had lots of ups and downs, but also the assassinations of Hezbollah leaders, the complete weakening of Hezbollah that paved the way for the bombing of Iran. So the regional context is very clear. You first make sure there is no country near you, Israel, that can retaliate once you bomb Iran. There is no, if you like, nearby colonial settler area capable of retaliating. That's Gaza, not just Hamas, because PFLP, Islamic Jihad, and other groups are also involved in all of this. So you weaken or get rid of them, and all this paves the way for attacking Iran. And then you have Turkey, another reactionary Islamic state that paves the way for the overthrow of Iran's other, not quite ally, but pragmatic friend, the Syrian dictator Assad. Why is that important? Because, again, it is the access of Iran to Israeli airspace that is very much damaged by that, and the possibilities of using maybe Revolutionary Guards settled in Syria. Having said that, we have to remember that as a regional ally, Assad was completely unreliable. He didn't do anything about Gaza. But of course, Turkey, Arab countries, United Arab Emirates, undoubtedly Saudi Arabia, were strengthening the jihadists in Syria, and they got their prize in the coming to power of the former jihadist, Mr. Jolani, who is now wearing a suit and a tie, and therefore is an acceptable politician loved by Trump and the European Union. So the Israel-Iran clash is not an accident. There is a long planning for it. And it was clearly very well choreographed in terms of trying to get the easiest sides first, but the military sides, trying to get leaders of Iran's Revolutionary Guards next, scientists, nuclear scientists in the next step, and finally, what I think both Israel and to a lesser extent the US hoped might happen. There are quite a lot of reliable leaks saying that Netanyahu had convinced Trump before the 12-day war that 48 hours would be enough. 48 hours of bombing of Iran would be enough for regime change from above. And of course, here again, the regional players have played a very active role. They have been involved in propaganda and so on. And here again, I think the political issues, the regional issues are far more important than the nuclear issue. I'm sorry, but we have idiot Nobel Prize winners who, Peace Prize winners, not scientists, who tell us, oh, if only Iran stopped nuclear development. I can assure you this is about the region. It's not about nuclear development. Had Iran got no nuclear weapons, they would have found something else. Chemicals, as they did with Saddam, who didn't have chemical weapons. Missiles are now being put forward by Netanyahu as one of the conditions for not renewing his attack against Iran and so on. So we are looking at basically an escalation of violence in the regions that paves the way for this kind of military attack. So the reason for this war, if it's not nuclear, why is it? And I think here we have to consider the fact that I think Mohsen referred to it as well. The very fact that Iran's Islamic Republic is not an anti-imperialist country. Anti-imperialism does require being anti-capitalist. This is not an one of the foremost neoliberal economies of the region. It doesn't really want to be an ally of China and Russia. It has been forced in that position, but its first choice is to be with the West. Most of their money, these clerics, their IRGC colleagues, the government people, all of their money, their relatives their money is invested in the West, their relatives are in the West. This is a bazaar mentality with market-orientated types of clerics and capitalists behind them. They have no sympathy with Russia or China, even though none of those countries are socialist, but they're not even into state capitalism. So that's not the reason we're witnessing all this. The problem the US has with Iran, and we have referred to it on a number of occasions, I think is on the one hand the fact that they have not forgiven the Iranian people, not the Islamic Republic, for getting rid of their main agent in the region, the ex-Shah. But they're also are in a position now, having got rid of any form of opposition, most of which were reactionary alternatives to existing dictators. For example, Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood against Mubarak, or elements of Jordanian opposition against the reactionary king. Having got rid of that, they don't want anyone that expresses an opinion different from their opinion. So it's the minor, and I emphasize minor, rhetoric of the Islamic Republic that is not acceptable. Now, we can say, and I have said it, that this rhetoric is in a way meaningless. The Islamic Republic even doesn't use the term imperialism. And the slogan, death to, is the wrong translation. What the slogan is actually down with. So they're saying down with US, but they don't consider US imperialist. They keep saying that's a Marxist term, we have nothing to do with it. they refer to it as the arrogance of the West. And in some ways, the Islamic Republic has to stick to that because it has sold out on everything else about 1979 revolution. So this level of, if you like, rhetoric, this level of pushing slogans does help them in making a case for their existence, for gaining support. In terms of the Arab street, they do a lot of propaganda in Arabic. They have completely, after the end of the civil war in Syria, they've completely ditched any Sunni Shia slogan. They're just, we are all Muslims defending Gaza and the Palestinians. We are all against US arrogance. And they are trying to build that kind of popular support. That popular support at the moment is no threat to these dictatorships, but is potentially a headache. And that is true as much of the Gulf states as it is of North Africa. And I think that is one of the, if you like, regional regional backgrounds to this war. In terms of economic dimensions of this, a country that is quite vast, that has 90 million population, is the fourth largest reserve of oil and the second largest reserve of gas, is something that is a problem, unless it is a country you can control. So for the United States, it is not the rhetoric of the Islamic Republic so much as the fact that it is not the island of stability that it was under the Shah, the obedient servant, the client state of the empire. It is these that make it identified as a headache. And to get rid of this headache, there are many plans. The regime change plan didn't work, quite obviously. People, at least during a military attack, do become patriotic and therefore do not stick to preconceived ideas of either Netanyahu or the Crown Prince. They actually support the reactionary state that has been suppressing them for months and years. They don't support the state as such. Maybe I should rephrase this. They support the existence of their country. And here, the history of the country, its background, the sense of national identities that even national minorities in Iran feel is of some consequence. So I think we are looking at a very dangerous time in the Middle East. We shouldn't see the ceasefire as any reason that it would last. One, because, well, first of all, if you listen to Trump, Iran's nuclear industry has been obliterated. If that's the case, you can't attack Iran on the excuse of the nuclear enrichment. However, that is not true, and we know that. I think Iran is taking an ambiguous position in that it's trying to say some of it is damaged, not all of it is damaged. That gives Netanyahu the possibility of going back to attack, but on the other hand, given Netanyahu's publicity that it's all resolved, we've destroyed everything, that makes it a difficult situation. There is the option of finding other reasons. Netanyahu's latest is the 480-kilometer missiles Iran has. There is the possibility that new sanctions will make the regime even weaker, and maybe a further attack would work. None of these are very clear, but what is clear is that unless there are dramatic changes within the Iranian state, and this is a very pragmatic state. So don't be surprised if one day they do come and accept lots of demands. Now that Putin is saying you have to have zero level of uranium enrichment. If they go that way, we will see maybe a tolerance of this regime for a bit longer, but not necessarily forever. On the other hand, I think the policy of reducing the power of the Islamic Republic, what I think we've called in this room degrading Iran's Islamic Republic, has been successful. Don't listen to the propaganda of the pro-Russians or the always optimists who say, oh, 12-day war was fantastic. Iran proved it can fight Israel and the US without any help. And it shows how powerful Iran's Islamic Republic is. That's not even the views that the Iranian government wants to portray, but it's not true. The reality is it is a weak state. The airspace in Iran is now fully open to any attack. There is no serious air defense in that country. I think people have rallied around a national identity. However, this can be very short-lived. Contrary to what all the publicity is, the Iranian state is actually, as I said, extremely opportunistic in the way it treats the population. So we are not witnessing mass executions of political prisoners. Laws have been passed about spying for Israel, but such laws existed, nothing new on that. The state is trying to pretend it has given up some of its more restrictive views. My own interpretation is that that has a very short time limit. It is only to allow consolidation. Once they have consolidated their power, they will go back to their repressive measures. And I think there is a possibility, at least, that if the current situation continues, a weak state will face opposition from various sections of the population. And here there is a hope that there will be more progressive forms of regime change, not one that involves returning a reactionary, defunct ex-crown prince from the dustbin of history and bringing him back to power, but other forms of opposition that existed, strikes, protests, and so on. However, in all of this, the weakness remains the absence of an organized left, the absence of a consolidated left, not necessarily just the fault of the Iranian left. Many have been executed, many have been the decimation of the Iranian left was unprecedented, even by the standards of the region. So we are in a very dangerous position in that. Before I finish, I want to also refer to some of the other aspects of this war that I've heard from others. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but I think they are important points to consider because it shows the way Israel, at least, carries wars. It's not just about Iran, but in the region, the way Israel carries its politics. And that is the policy of decapitation that Israel has followed. Now, I do understand that in terms of Lebanon, it wasn't just decapitation. Not only leaders of Hezbollah were killed, but a large number were maimed or injured as a result of the way it worked. But I think this concept that if we kill the leaders of the Islamic Republic's Revolutionary Guards, everything will change, was a mistake, and they probably now realize it. If they didn't, there are all sorts of military advisors, I hear, who are telling them from universities, war studies experts who are telling them from Europe and the US. And some of this has to do with the way power is organized in the Islamic Republic. And this is important because the left has also got this, at least the left in exile, has this simplistic view of the Islamic Republic, reflected mainly by the Western news media, that we have a supreme leader and a pyramid of structures. It's more complicated than that. It's not two factions. There are many factions within the Islamic Republic. Power is centralized around the supreme leader, but 94% of the institutions of the Islamic Republic, according to war studies at King's College London, and I've looked it up in elsewhere as well, are non-central. They are networks, sub-networks. They're influenced by centers of power, but they do not necessarily follow instructions. They are not controlled by the center. There is a degree of autonomy and agency, and a strategic form of mission control. There is two important factors that makes the institutions of the Islamic Republic very solid. One is ideological, but I think the ideological one is getting smaller and smaller. The other one is profiteering glue, and the profiteering glue is quite serious. So the more the West imposes sanctions, we have a growth of black market mafia connected with the Revolutionary Guards, and the connection of these two is very much financial. It's because they profiteer from the black market, from the sanctions, and here the glue is very strong. So they would fight, in my opinion, they would fight to their last breath to keep IRGC and the network of financial mafias around it. So this simplistic idea reflected in a lot of the left, that the Islamic Republic is unpopular, so it will collapse. Workers are strong, so it will collapse. None of this is realist. It's this kind of silly optimism is precisely why the Islamic Republic survives. It survives because we have notions of our dreams as opposed to what reality is. The reality is the glue of this profiteering, which goes beyond Iran, goes actually into the regional context, because it involves sections of capital in UAE, sections of capital in Dubai, and to a lesser extent, sections of Saudi capital is important, and we can't not talk about it. And then I think we have to think of what is considered now as the immediate aftermath of this 12-day war. My guess is that both of these glues are now strengthened, but their lives can be short-lived. For example, a new wave of protest can change this. A new continued genocide, and the fact that we are now in Gaza looking at a concentration camp set up by Israel, a concentration camp of people ready to be deported, with price labels on how much their journey will cost to US, to Israel, to Tony Blair Institute, whoever, is the kind of regional context that will make another attack on Iran both possible, desirable, but also next time more successful, in my opinion. And just to end this on the question of BRICS, I think you have to accept that Iran's membership of the BRICS is against the wishes of the leadership and the members of the Revolutionary Guards and the senior leaders of the Islamic Republic. They have been forced into this. In this relationship, you don't have Russia supporting Iran if there is a war. If you listen not just to Putin really pushing the button on the zero nuclear enrichment, he's very clear. He doesn't want a nuclear Iran. And it's understandable. Russia doesn't want a nuclear Iran. It will create all sorts of other countries who would want to compete with Iran, and that would be a threat to Russia. Russia has very close relations. Both Russia and China have very close relations with Israel. Putin, in an interview last week, told a reporter, an American reporter, that Israel is the largest Russian-speaking country in the world after Russia. And we already know of the technological work that they do together and so on. So Russia is not in that position. China has developed new economic relations with Israel, and it will not jeopardize those. China's interest in terms of economy, except the cheap oils that it buys from Iran, is far more serious if you take into account the Belt and Road relations with Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Qatar. So the price for China is to maintain those relationships. And if Iran is a victim of that, I don't think the Chinese will worry too much, because in the long term, they might be able to find other arrangements with some of these countries. So I'll finish here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yassamine, and thank you, Mohsen. Comrades, we've got two categories of attendees in the meeting. There's panelists who can speak,